Great. Welcome. Today is Tuesday, February the 1st of 2022. This is a Board of County Commissioners regular work session meeting. And we're starting today at 1 o'clock. We have calling in from home. We have Commissioner Greg Postman, Francie Jacober, Steve Child, and I think Kelly is working on getting on the link. We also have County Manager here, and in the room I have Michaela Higgins from our IT department and Canyon from Grassroots. So again, I have the whole room to myself. It'd be nice at some point we get people to join me. I'm getting lonely over here. But I am going to turn this over to Ann Driggers, who I believe is on the Zoom with us. There she is. Hi, Ann.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am here just to really introduce Julie and Scott with Chandler Asset Management, but first I'd just like to kick it off and say they're going to present an economic update and also our investment portfolio status as of December 31st. And then we're going to move into continuing the conversation we had regarding ESG and SRI strategies and a potential change that we might have to our investment policy to meet the board's desires regarding that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Julie or Scott. I'm not sure who's going to go first, but thank you.
Thank you. One sec. We need to move Kelly over. Are you doing that, Michaela? Okay, great. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, we just had to get Kelly moved over to her right place here on Zoom. Okay, we got it.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Ann. I will share my screen.
Perfect.
Can everyone see this?
I believe
Yes?
we can.
Okay, very good. Well, I'm going to kick us off this afternoon with a brief economic update just to give us some context of our investment environment, and then I'll turn it over to Scott to walk you through the portfolio and talk a little bit further about the investment policy and ESG and SRI, which we had a very nice discussion last time, and to continue that conversation. So to kick us off here, it's a very interesting time that we're meeting here. And there's a lot going on in the markets, as most of you are aware, I'm sure. And we're kind of at an inflection point here with regard to monetary policy. So we always like to start with a few comments about the Federal Open Market Committee. And why do we do that? As a reminder, they are really the primary determinant of our short-term interest rates. And that's where we're investing for your portfolio, for the county's portfolio. So we did have a Fed meeting last week, and the Fed really started to pivot in terms of their monetary policy. We've been seeing a tremendous amount of accommodation throughout the pandemic with multiple emergency measures and overnight rates down to 0 to a quarter point, all sorts of lending programs. And it's, as they've said, it's time to move out of that mode as the economy has grown in a very strong fashion over the last year and a half, and we're at a point where the Fed needs to shift gears, if you will. So they, the press conference, the statement that they made, everything was perceived as pretty hawkish by the market. Hawkish meaning with a propensity for rising rates, and so that's what we're expecting for this year. Perhaps as soon as the March meeting, the next meeting. And that's really kind of what they've telegraphed in their messaging. There was also a lot of talk about what they will do with the balance sheet. So as you may remember, they've been making purchases of treasuries and agency mortgage-backed securities throughout the pandemic, built up the balance sheet to almost $9 trillion, and they are tapering those purchases on a monthly basis. They expect to be concluding their tapering around the March timeframe, thus the implication for the first quarter point rate hike to probably be at the March meeting. Now, the Fed has penciled in, and I use that word penciled in because they are data dependent and it does change all the time, but they have penciled in 3 quarter point rate hikes for 2022. However, the market gets a little bit ahead of the Fed, and the market has baked in or is forecasting about 5 rate hikes. Some are forecasting even more. So I think the tea leaves are clear in the fact that there is a rising rate environment on the short end of the curve here, and really the whole curve, and we'll talk about that in a moment. The question is, what is the timing and to what degree? And a lot of that depends on the progression of our economy throughout the year. So as you may remember, the Fed has a dual mandate: maximum employment and stable prices. So if we look at labor markets, the maximum employment component is well on its way to being achieved. So we have made tremendous progress in employment statistics throughout the last year, and we are down to about 3.9% unemployment. So we are very closely approaching that full employment component of the Fed's dual mandate. There is really a lot of wage growth out there, and there is a supply and demand imbalance for jobs right now. So certainly not every job has come back that was lost during the pandemic, but if we look at 3.9% versus prior to the pandemic, we were at about 3.5%. So we are rapidly approaching the full employment component there. Inflation, stable prices. Well, the Fed has certainly admitted that the inflationary environment is quite persistent, not as transitory as they initially thought, and the numbers really tell the story. So in December, we had CPI reading of 7%, highest in almost 40 years. And the Fed really prefers the personal consumption expenditures, 5.8%. So it tends to lag the CPI a little bit, and the core component, which strips out food and energy, almost 5%. So no matter how you slice it, no matter how you look at the numbers, it's all well above the Fed's 2% target. Thus, their tightening cycle, which is set to begin this year to help combat these inflationary pressures that we're seeing in the economy. Overall, if we look big picture, economic growth, fourth quarter GDP came in very strong, 6.9%. This is an advanced reading, so it will get revised. However, it was much stronger than expected and much stronger than Q3 at 2.3%. So at least on a preliminary basis, it looks like 2021, we're coming in at around 5.7% GDP growth, which is the strongest number since 1984, pretty significant. We are expecting that growth to slow into this year, and the consensus number currently is around 3.8%, which is still quite strong. When we look historically, the average is about 1.8%. So what does all this mean for interest rates and the markets? There's quite a bit of volatility in the market. Equities have taken a beating here in January, which was pretty much expected as we get into a rising rate environment and a tightening cycle by the Fed. But earnings are still strong. And again, we're at an inflection point. So there's a lot of forces at work out there. And we're certainly seeing the anticipation of rate increases in the yield curve. So if we look at the stark green curve on the right-hand side, this is US Treasuries as of December 31st. You can see that rates are much higher across the curve than they were 1 year ago, which is the little red dotted line at the bottom here. So quite a bit of change there. You can also see that the steepest part of the curve is the short end of the curve. So really between 2 years and 5 years. So that's certainly having an impact on portfolio returns and on portfolio strategy. And we've got a little bit of flattening in the longer end of the curve. So just to give you all an idea where rate levels are, where we're investing for US Treasuries, which is our most liquid and safe instrument. The 2-year Treasury trading at about a 117. I think the last time we met, which wasn't that long ago, it was about half that. So we're up to a 117 on the 2-year, about 163 on the 5-year, and the 10-year at about a 180. And this certainly has an impact on what Scott's going to review in terms of our portfolio performance and strategy going forward. So can we address any questions about the economy and the markets before we get into the portfolio?
don't think I see any hands up.
Okay. And Scott, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Julie. And just as a reminder, our objective is to, and it's in the center of this page, to equal or exceed the assigned benchmark. And that assigned benchmark is a 1 to 3 year Treasury Agency index. And as Julie talked about, we've got a rising rate environment, and that will put pressure on total return performance, meaning that the underlying securities in your portfolio will lose price as interest rates go up. But I want to emphasize that the nice thing about this environment is we've got much higher yields in which to invest. And then on the following page, you can see the compliance with all of the required categories with 2475-601, as well as your investment policy. And then we thought that based on what Ann opened up with and the possible addition of language with regard to ESG and SRI, or environmental social governance and socially responsible investing, it certainly hasn't relaxed in terms of the demand for knowledge, demand for addressing the possibility of placing language in policies. It's the most requested presentation by far that I've experienced, in, at least in the past 5 years anyway, certainly not the last 30, but the last 5, relative to a topic outside of our normal quote unquote, portfolio review and economic review that we're providing today. In fact, provided yet another one last week to a large group in California. We've highlighted, if you recall, we had 4 examples, and we highlighted the language that we think is probably most applicable to your entity, Pitkin, with regard to the possibility of adding this language. And it's always a balance between safety, liquidity, yield, and what we should use as our guidelines and our foundation, and looking at appropriate ESG, SRI language that wouldn't be too prohibitive, but still be reflective of Pitkin County and the values. And just as a brief reminder relative to the long presentation we gave at our last meeting, socially responsible investing really is an exclusionary concept, meaning, okay, we're not going to invest in, because it reflects Pitkin County's, as an example, values, to not invest in, say, tobacco products. And that's then across the board. But just know that our firm and our credit committee is using environmental, social, and governance evaluation just like we would an investment ratio or a liquidity ratio when we're doing standard financial analysis and doing our own independent credit analysis for individual names. So that's already occurring because our goal is risk management, and ESG is certainly a component of that. But the socially responsible investing side of it is truly a standalone. We're going to eliminate, say, fossil fuels, firearms, tobacco. So I think this is a great point to stop and get any feedback relative to, Ann, I don't know if you want to lead the discussion in terms of the possibility of adding this language.
Yes, thank you, Scott. So if we remember the last time Scott and Julie met with us, they did this fantastic presentation on the entire history and how ESG and SRI might be implemented within organizations. And we kind of ran out of time when we got to talking about potentially changes to our investment policy. And I think at that time, several board members had indicated their support for the language, I think in example number 2, which Scott has highlighted here. And so we've kind of brought this back to you to continue that dialogue and receive direction from the board as to what you would like to see in our investment policy.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the board members. I agree with the language myself in example 2, and would support adding it. But let me see, Greg, I know that this was an issue that you wanted to bring forward, so please.
Great, thank you. Let me lower my hand first. I would probably lean toward example number 2, and I had some questions. I know, of course, a lot, say, for instance, fossil fuel companies are starting to invest in electrification. So you'll see companies like ExxonMobil putting in solar fields and charging stations, and so it starts getting murky. So the question would be, you know, they may still have a substantial investment in natural gas production or tar sands production, but they're also one of the leaders in electrification. How will you know, a question like that get answered?
Greg, you're bringing up a great point. I mean, you really are, because it's a topic of conversation that I think is going to just grow relative to, for example, the Exxons or the Chevrons of the world, and the amount of money they are moving to, you know, the research side of electricity or renewable resources. But then, you know, I have seen discussions take place with a lot, primarily public entities, and it runs the gamut in terms of, you know, we still don't, a public entity might not want to still invest in an Exxon or Chevron, and then the same board with a different member thinks that the point you're bringing up right now is a reason to invest. And so that's why it's so important that if we eliminate a sector or names, it reflects the breadth of the opinions of Pitkin. And realistically, you know, in looking at this language, I'm thinking, what would it truly prevent us from buying for any public entity in Colorado with this language? And realistically, it's real. Those two names I just mentioned. You know, Exxon, we would not invest in Exxon, but otherwise, it's still, we still can achieve the safety, liquidity, yield being last, and competing against the benchmark and adding alpha or outperforming the benchmark, even with this language. But you're bringing up a very good point in terms of the current discussion when you go and take a hard right turn here away from what we're looking at with regard to fossil fuels. Because, you know, if you're a freshman sitting in a business class and that professor says, okay, you know, we're going to talk about ESG and SRI, and we're going to have a debate for our final exam, and you get to draw out of a hat, you know, to support fossil fuels because of exactly what we're talking about, the investment in renewable resources, or to not invest in them, you know, past history, oil spills, the damage that you could easily argue if you were that student, is a debate that's going to be ongoing for sure. And that was probably a much longer-winded answer than you wanted, but I wanted to bring out those facts.
If I could just follow up very briefly, you know, a similar example is the mining of cobalt, which is right at this point is an essential element in cell phones and in lithium batteries the electric vehicles use. And I know the technology is moving rapidly to trying to eliminate cobalt, but for the time being, it's mined by, you know, disadvantaged, you know, child labor in Central Africa, to a great extent, and it's not regulated as well, you know. And so even say a company that's doing something green or positive in the way of an electrification or an EV move could still be, you know, investing in something that we wouldn't want any part of. It's a tough question. So I guess what it comes back to is, would we have to revisit it regularly to realign ourselves, or would this be on autopilot and we leave it up to you?
I think the language itself would be revisited at a minimum of annually, and we can have the discussion at that point in time. But again, know that irrespective, when we're looking at individual names on our credit team, the risk that can be presented by the lack of regard to ESG is certainly an evaluation. I mean, go back to, I think the best story I've got is especially the greenwashing story of VW back in 2014, 2015, when they were doing everything possible on the marketing side to tout their green diesel products. And, what was interesting, it was just a $70,000 grant that was given to some doctorate students for Western Virginia University. And in the meantime, you've got the EPA with an $8 billion budget that didn't find it. And the 3 graduate students that did find it, and again, they had to beg for this $70,000 grant, and found that, VW had been placing a chip that had quote unquote test mode. And then when you weren't in test mode, it flipped over to regular driving. And when they tested regular driving, it was really bad relative to the carcinogens that were being coming out of the tailpipe. And so that led to, to date, that cost VW over $30 billion. The forced departure of the CEO and also numerous executives. And so it's probably the best example in terms of risk going back to, say, 2013. And we wouldn't have been, but an investor in VW. And when that was outed, if you will, VW lost a third of its equity value. But again, that's just a story I have relative to the importance of looking at the risk of ESG when it comes to corporate names.
Great. Thank you. Are you done, Greg? Yeah, okay. Francie, please.
Hi. How are you guys today? Thank you for coming. When I brought up this issue last time, Greg, about we have to be careful about divesting in oil companies that are doing a lot to make the changeover, Kelly was not in favor of that. I'm sure she's not now as well. If I'm not mistaken, Kelly, I don't want to speak for you, but I do think it's very hard to tell what oil companies are actually doing. There's so much greenwashing in all of the corporations, but I think particularly with the oil companies. So I'm definitely in favor of this, but I have to ask, I think the last time we were talking about this, when we actually looked at the components of what we're investing in, almost all of them had interest in oil and weapons, and most of them were U.S. government entities, as I recall, and U.S. government is certainly involved in arms sales and trades and manufacture, and so I thought it was going to be really difficult for us to find things to actually exclude because the component of our investments was so much government-based. Am I remembering that correctly?
Prince, are you asking me that question? Or?
Yeah, sure. I'm asking. That's fine. Yeah, you is fine.
Okay. Yeah, I remember that being brought up, and bring again. All of you are bringing up great points, because you could argue to the point of not having anything in which to invest. So we really like to keep the discussion within the entity itself, so Pitkin County, because it's not our values that we want to include or exclude. It's Pitkin's values that we want. We just want to provide as much guidance and answer as many questions as we can, and also provide what we see, not just in Colorado, but nationally, with regard to adopted language that isn't too cumbersome, and it is a fine line, and it's not clear relative to what one person thinks is the appropriate action in terms of ESG and appropriate practice versus another. So that's the primary reason we want to make sure that the decision is made by Pitkin County and certainly not by Chandler Asset Management. But just know that, our job on the credit side is to review, when appropriate and when applicable, any items that might present risk on the ESG side. But we have had these types of discussions many times over the course of the past year and a half, 2 years. And usually public entities are discussing what they want to eliminate through SRI, i.e. what it says right here in terms of, tobacco products, firearms, not used in national defense. But we've also heard the case that you're bringing up, Rancy, and that's that, you could argue that the U.S., let me go to the extreme, the U.S. is a purveyor of, nuclear arms and arms sales. So, where do you draw that line?
And so are there areas where we can eliminate investments in these products? I mean, isn't it true that most of our investments are U.S. government based?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
They are, and if I may just add a couple of comments here, I think your comments are well taken, and I think a couple things jump out at me in the way this is worded, and we can of course accommodate changes to wording to suit your values as well. But if we think about significant portion of their revenues, so we think the U.S. government, yes, we have nuclear weapons, we have arms, et cetera, but is that our primary business? No. I mean, so when we think about this, I think we think, what's the primary business, right? Until ExxonMobil has their primary business like Tesla does, they're going to fall in that category, right? The U.S. government's primary business is not to, to be an arms dealer necessarily, right? Which isn't to say we don't, trade in that area. So I think it's meant to exclude entities that are primarily focused in these areas. Secondly, I'd like to go back to the very beginning of the statement. All general objectives mandated by law are met and created equal. So first and foremost, we have to consider the safety, liquidity, and return components. First and foremost, before we get into what are we considering from an ESG SRI standpoint. So the safest, most liquid instrument we can possibly buy is a US Treasury. So if we exclude everything, which some people do, quite frankly, it's likely you're not going to meet the objectives, the investment objectives. So we have to keep that in mind first and foremost, the objectives and the legalities of the investment policy. So typically the ESG SRI is really focused on credit. So it's not necessarily focused on our government securities. So right now, the county's portfolio is entirely invested in government securities. We don't own any credit, meaning any companies, any corporate bonds, for example. This is really focused on if we were to ever buy any corporate bonds or commercial paper that's permitted under statute or under your policy. So I just want to kind of give some context to this that might help the discussion here.
Thank you, Julie.
That's what I thought. Thank you so much for that explanation.
Of course.
Okay, Steve and Francie, you can put your hand down now, or you're going to confuse me. Steve,
I'm looking at the wording in the green, and I'm specifically where it says exploration of fossil fuels. I don't think the wording of that would be correct if we were going to take this as our policy, but I would think the extraction and perhaps transportation of fossil fuels. So I'm thinking of the pipelines that, natural gas pipelines, that's their entire business is centered around. They're not the ones mining the natural gas, but they're the ones transporting it to the market. So that is their entire business, basically. But then you get into a gray area, someone like Union Pacific Railroad that hauls a lot of coal, but they haul a lot of other things. It's not their coal they're hauling. It's, you know, they're sort of a service for hire. And so would you not invest in Union Pacific because they haul some coal? That's, you know, one segment of their business, but there's a lot of gray areas that would be hard to determine. How do you handle those situations?
When and if what you're talking about would become applicable for your entity, I guess the straight answer is we don't. Again, I would go back to what Julie said. You know, what's because you can take this, you know, to the extreme with everything. And so yes, it wouldn't eliminate us from investing in a transportation or a rail company, but you know, I think again, you can make it as complicated as you want or as straightforward as you want, and that's why it's so important to, when it might become applicable to Pitkin relative to credit, that, you know, you go through the elimination of sectors that you think reflects your values. And then the second level, if you will, of evaluation occurs within our own credit team, and know that the E, S, and the G is being considered from a risk standpoint. So, you know, safety, liquidity, and then the yield component relative to value we're trying to add if we were investing in credit.
Okay. Any other questions from the board? Greg?
Yeah, if I could, I was just thinking, yeah, so with following up on Steve's comment, you could put exploitation of fossil fuels or production of fossil fuels would be a broader thing. But before that, in that boldface, investments are prohibited in entities that receive a significant portion of their revenues. We could say receive a significant and growing portion of their revenues. If we're supporting a company that's moving in the right direction, say toward electrification, we could actually put that in here and say that, you know, the board will be involved with and look at this on an annual basis with our investment advisors, and we're going to favor companies that are going in the direction that meets our values, and we're going to discriminate against investments that go against our values. I think I don't want to make this more complicated. I understand the dilemma, but I'm also thinking maybe a little bit of a tweak would help. So the easiest thing would be to say, if a company receives, you know, if their portion of the revenue is growing from those entities relative to their other investments, which we might like, then perhaps that's one we turn down. But if they're moving in the opposite direction, it would give us the opportunity to invest and support them. Hope that made sense.
Yeah, well, I think the sentence above the one that you just said in bold kind of clarifies that for me, in my mind. Again, I don't want to make it too wordy. If anything, with exploration of fossil fuels on that second to the last sentence, we might want to slash and put exploration and extraction of fossil fuels. I think that would address some of our concerns, but I think the sentence above that, Greg, kind of clarifies, as well as those entities that practice environmentally sound and fair labor practices. I think that environmentally sound kind of covers, you know, what we really are looking at to protecting our values of investments.
I think that might be a good way to go based on this conversation, is adding extraction to the exploration and extraction of fossil fuels. And again, our goal, and meaning the Chandler's this time, is to not leave anything open to interpretation relative to any of our clients. I mean, we want it kind of hard fast relative to the SRI component or the elimination of sectors or names. And then, as you might appreciate, when we're evaluating names and digging through numbers and looking at components of environmental, social, and governance that can possibly present any risk. We do that independently, but I think that the addition of extraction would get there. And again, I think in terms of a growing percentage, that's fairly tough to evaluate relative to what are we comparing it to? Because there's so many ways you could measure that in terms of total profit, what is it contributing to in terms of the bottom line? What's the flow through? So you could slice and dice that so many ways, and this is already a fairly gray topic. So I think addressing this conversation through adding the additional language to the exploration of fossil fuels, adding extraction, might get to what you all believe would be a reflection of your values.
Thank you. I think that's okay with me. I'm okay with that.
Okay.
I think some of the other examples that we had shared with you, some people actually, there seems to be a lot of, gray area around significant portion. Some people actually put a percentage on it, so it's measurable. But, again, that's getting more precise is, there's pros and cons to that as well. Some put 51%, but do you really want that in there? I kind of like how it is currently, but just food for thought for the group.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands here.
Patty, is Kelly able to weigh in? I haven't heard her voice yet today. At one point she wanted to be let in, and I want to make sure she's there.
She's here. She just has not raised her hand. So, Kelly, would you like to comment?
Yeah. No, I'm happy with the way this is going. I don't have a lot of additional content to tweak here. I think it sounds good. I continue to think that if ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP, Suncor, Shell want any of our money, then they can begin investing a significant portion of their, practices into sustainable energy and renewable energy and the transition into the green economy that we prefer to see. So for me, I think Pickens County should totally divest from those agencies. I'll point out that, similar governments to ours, other municipalities around the country are taking it another step and suing all these companies for the emergency that they've created over the 40 years. So us, I think making a statement that should there be opportunities to invest in them with our portfolio, we are going to forgo those is a small but powerful statement, and that's what I'd like to see us do. Thank you.
Great. So now I'm seeing, unless Scott Dooley, you have more to present?
We do have more to present. I just we thought after the compliance page, it was appropriate to have this discussion, and I'll review fairly quickly turn our attention back to the portfolio and go from there if you like, and try and finish this up for you in 5 minutes or so.
Perfect. The floor is yours.
Okay, great. So on this particular page, the portfolio characteristics page, just draw your attention to that center column there. That's your portfolio as of December 31st. And again, managing risk is managing the duration of the portfolio, which equates to the weighted average maturity. But you can see here a 1.77 for your duration versus the benchmark at slightly longer at a 182. And your total market value at the end of the quarter on December 31st, $71,302,503. And then on the following page, you can see the duration distribution or the structure of your maturities. And you can see, I think it's important to note, especially in a rising interest rate environment, that you've got approximately a little over 25% maturing in the next 12 months. So that's a good thing. And then a significant portion of your portfolio is maturing in the next 24 months. So as these securities mature, we will reinvest them at much higher yields. But again, as I stated in the very beginning, after Julie's economic presentation, when we see interest rates go up like we have, it does put price pressure on your current holdings, which are reflected a little bit later when I talk about your investment performance. But then on the following page, you can see the duration as a percent of benchmark on the bottom there. And going back in time, there was the concerns at the beginning of the pandemic, where we might go relative to the numerous unknowns for the economy, U.S. economy and global economy as a result of the pandemic, and dropped that duration down, and we went back to neutral. And I expect with the rising rate environment that we're going to target slightly less to help protect your principal of the benchmark. And we won't be at 100% typically, and we'll be probably focusing between 95 and 100% duration. And then on the following page, you can see the issuers and the breakdown there. Won't spend a whole lot of time on this. And then on the following page, you can see the investment performance. Again, this is total return. So it doesn't mean we've realized any losses. It just means that this is reflective of the underlying price of your securities plus the interest. And that's looking at 12 months. It's reflective of what I was just talking about. When you have such a significant rate increase, the current price of the securities you hold is going to go down. So you can see the Pitkin County portfolio at negative 45 basis points versus the benchmark at negative 55. But again, that's unrealized. You look at 2 years at a 1.33% versus the benchmark at a 125. And you look at since inception, 2% versus 2.01%. And then on the following page, you can see the purchased yield of your portfolio. So right now, it equates to about 87 basis points, 90 basis points. That compares to, for example, CSAFE and Call a Trust. Their two products at about 8 basis points and 4 basis points, respectively. We're expecting interest rates to go up, and we think that this is probably the trough of the Pitkin County portfolio that we manage in terms of the yield generation in your portfolio. And the nice thing about this environment we're in is we're going to have much higher interest rates to invest in, and that'll be a good thing. But in the near term, the short term, on a total return basis, or the price of those securities, they will be going down if we continue to see interest rates go up. But over the course of time, and I'll define time over the course of the next 2 years, we're going to see all of this work itself out relative to higher yields in which to invest, and that yield component overcoming the loss of price component, and we'll be back to as we would expect for your strategy, a 1 to 3 year, performing quite well versus putting your money in a money market fund or local government investment pool. And then with the following page, one more, you can see the consolidated portfolio. And again, as of 12/31, the total market value, 128,279. 988. The average purchase yield, when you include the liquidity portion, at 58 basis points, or 0.58%. So I went through that fairly quickly, but I hit the highlights. Any questions?
I'm not seeing any hands come up.
Okay.
Thank you, Scott.
Then possibly, and I'll defer to you, our next steps then, Julie and myself will provide the exact language and recommendation to Ann, and then Ann, I will defer to you relative to the process forward from there.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, Ann, is I think I'm seeing the board supporting example number 2 as amended? And what is our next step? Does that have to come back to us in any kind of formal manner?
Correct, it does. I will prepare a resolution with the revised or updated investment policy attached for your review and then approval in a public hearing.
Perfect. Okay. Does the board have any further questions? You guys do such a great job. I want to thank you. You put it into a manner that I think is understandable for all of us, which is not always easy to do when you're talking finance at this level. So we really do appreciate it. Greg?
Yeah, just wanted to say thank you for this, and I appreciate the options as you brought them to us. And I think I feel better with the small changes we made, and I think we can support it. It's supportable. If it comes up, I think it demonstrates that we have a thoughtful philosophy about investment here, and that we're trying to be trying to be aware of how the money is being invested in and doing our best to put it in the right places through you. So I want to say thank you, and I'm ready to move forward with it.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Francie?
Just one last question, and thank you guys so much. Julie, what's the percent probability that you will invest in any corporations, any credit accounts, or is it going to stay primarily in the government funds?
Well, I think we will move toward corporate investment as we get into this, as we approach this inflection point in the market. So under Colorado statute, we can only invest in corporations that are rated in the AA category. There's very few of those. And as the Fed stepped in with all of their emergency measures during the pandemic, spread levels, so any compensation that you get over and above a US Treasury, basically compressed to practically nothing. So we obviously feel like you should be compensated for any risk that you take over and above a government security. As we're entering this period of the Fed pulling back all of their accommodation that they put in place, we're just starting to see spreads widen out. So to the extent we see an attractive opportunity where we feel like the compensation is fair for being invested in one of these instruments, I think we'll be approaching that environment this year where we will be bringing some recommendations to the table. Now, that being said, you will still be primarily in US government entities. So we may have a few positions this time next year. It will not be Exxon or Chevron.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Unless they make dramatic swings in the environmental direction.
Exactly.
All right, any other comments from the board? Or Julie or Scott or Ann? Okay, again, our thanks. We do appreciate it when you spend the time to come and speak with us.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much.
Appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you in person someday.
Yeah, that would be great. We can't wait. That would be great.
Same.
You're welcome anytime.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, next item on our agenda is review of future calendars. So I see Mr. Peacock has joined us.
Yeah, thanks, Patty. Have a few things for y'all. So just want to make a note that next week we have set aside time for discussion on the replacement of an alternate 3-year term on the Airport Advisory Board due to Andrew Doremus's recent resignation and Meg Haynes stepping up to fill that vacancy. Charlotte will send you a link to the applicants on the previous shortlist, and we will look for some guidance from the board next week on that. So wanted you to know about that. Francie yesterday had pointed out that we had not set aside time on the calendars yet for clerk and recorder interviews and follow-up. And part of the reason for that was that we were looking at just how the applications came in. Our deadline was at the end of January. We did have 3 applicants, so we're happy for that. But we would also like to go back out for 2 more weeks, do some more advertising in the papers, and just see if there's any other interest, just to make sure the board has a full slate of candidates to look at. And so what we have proposed is pushing those deadlines back 2 weeks for submission, and then we'll schedule time for applicant review and interviews on future agendas. Maybe, Patty, if you're okay, I'll pause there just to see if that's okay with the board. I do have a few more items to go over.
So let's address John's suggestion that we extend the application deadline for the clerk and recorder. Is everybody okay with another 2 weeks? Janice's.
Sorry, when would that close again then? Mid-March?
Yeah, so we're putting some ads together. It would actually close, so it closed January 31st, Kelly, so it closed mid-February, right around probably Valentine's Day.
Valentine's Day. That's a great day. And we do have
my husband's birthday.
Yeah, that's a great birthday day. But we also have Janice's retirement date is technically April 1st, correct?
That's correct. And Janice and I have also been talking about having an arrangement where she'll help with transition. She wouldn't be in the office full time, but would have some hours dedicated to help with transition. Whatever transition needs are, I'd expect that a lot of that would probably fall into elections.
Okay.
So we'll have some overlap beyond that April 1st date.
Okay, Francie, and then Steve.
Yeah, I just want to remind you guys, I'm going to have to recuse from these conversations because my daughter-in-law is applying for this position. So if we're going to try and talk about it the week after the application process is over, that's when I'm chairing the meeting. So we probably want to put it off till the next week.
Well, I'm hoping you don't discuss it when I'm not here. So we'll make it in the first part of March when I'm back. But thank you, Francie, for bringing that to our attention. So, is that all, Francie?
Yes.
Okay, Steve?
Since the person who is appointed clerk, if they wanted to run for election in the fall, they have a deadline, a date where they have to have filed by. I want to make sure that we're not pushing the candidates too close to that deadline by pushing this out 2 weeks. That's going to shorten their time period, probably. Do you have those dates, John?
I think I have them in my other calendar. Kelly, do you remember right off? I know they don't usually declare party affiliation, so the assembly dates are not of concern, but I think it's sometime in April, isn't it, Kelly?
I think petitions can be picked up the first or second week in April, and then they're returned 2 weeks later. So it all happens in April for anyone who wishes to run for any office in Pickens County. And that's outside of the party process. The party process is way earlier.
So we should be okay if we appoint somebody before the 1st of April, which we'd want to do anyway if that's Janice's stepping down date. And then, John, really quick, back to the airport. I don't know if the board gave any direction on moving Rich Berkeley from the 1-year alternate to the 2-year, which is vacated by Meg. Generally, we do that when we move people up in rank. Does the board want to comment on that now, or do you want to save it for?
I would say let's have that on our plate. I hadn't thought about that, but we could think about it, and when we have the discussion about who to appoint, then we could make that decision. But that does sound like a logical thing to do, Patty.
Generally, that's what we do. So, Rich, just a heads up, we'll want to bring that back as part of the discussion.
Got it. Thank you, Patty.
All right, moving along, Mr. Peacock.
All right, it's all easy stuff from here, I think. So just a reminder, this Friday is the ski day with Eagle County, Basalt, and Snowmass Village. Charlotte should have forwarded, I think she's forwarded an email to all of you from Eagle County with details. Folks are meeting at the Brush Creek Park and Ride at 10 a.m. or the Elk Camp Gondola at 10:30 a.m. And then lunch will be 12:30 at base camp.
So, John, is anyone planning to be at base camp prior to that and try and get us seating? I was up there the other day and the place was packed. You know, and you never know from day to day what the turnout will be at that restaurant. So, do you know if there's any plans? Because I will plan to be there early and see what I can do.
Yeah, I do not know if that's the case, Patty.
Well, you know what?
Patty,
Yeah, Greg?
you might reach out to Gina at Kaplan's office and just let her know how many people. I think, you know, they're in the loop, but it'd be good to, maybe they can help us rope off a section.
Yeah, well, I don't think we have any idea how many people because we don't know if the general, voters constituency in Eagle County might join for lunch. So I'll reach out to Gina, but I'll just plan to be there early. The other thing is, it's my understanding in going into restaurants at Base Village there in Snowmass that you have to have a copy of your vaccination card. I was there. Yeah, John?
Sorry, Patty. For Skico restaurants, that is true. I don't believe base camp is.
Well, I was at, what's the other one there? Kelly, what's the one by the ice rink?
The Limelight.
No, but there's
Collective.
The Collective. Is that a ski company run? Because they had big signs, make sure you have your vaccination card ready to show. They didn't ask me for it, but I had it ready.
Yeah, the Collective is not, but some restaurants are requiring as a 100% vaccinated venue. And so we'll double check on
Okay.
base camp. I'm not sure that they are.
All right, so that'd be great. But I'll plan to be there early on Friday. And I'll get a hold of Gina. I don't know what the ski company can do to help us, but I'll make sure I find room for all of us to be there. Are all 5 of us going to be there? Francie, you're not coming?
No.
Okay.
I'm riding with you, Patty.
Yeah, Kelly's riding up with me. Are you skiing? Okay, so you want to be there early. We'll work it out.
I think I'm going to go cross-country skiing on the golf course before and then end up there at, Base Village for the lunch.
Okay. Kelly, I'll get you there in time to get up the gondola. There's always something to do over there. There's, you can go watch the kids ice skating. It's pretty fun. All right. John, thank you.
All right. And then the last thing for me is we do have a date scheduled for Representative Wills, which is March 8th. He's planning to be up to visit with you from 1 to 1:30 with the caveat that the schedule could still change. And so we'll let you know if there's any changes to that.
Yeah. That was great. Charlotte went out of her way and got a hold of him. So, and he was very, very pleased to be invited. Kelly, that was a great idea. Thank you.
That's it on my end, Patty.
All right. Does anybody else have anything for future agendas? I'm going to bring the board up to speed. Melissa and I are finishing drafting the evaluations. They will be of John and John. They will be coming back to us at our executive session also on February the 8th. And I did have John Ely's River District River Report added to our BOCC board membership reports. So we can get an update as needed, we'll make sure that he's allowed his space, and I'll let John know about that, and he thought that was a great idea. So, anything else? Seeing nothing?
Yeah, two things, Patty, sorry.
Yes.
Biodiversity initiative, if they're ready to report out, it'd be great to get that scheduled. I'm anxious to hear from them. And then I wonder if we want to revisit a conversation about an agriculture advisory board. I don't know if this is something we have to sort of come out of the retreat from. It seems a little more minor than that, but something this board has talked about. So I'm interested in at least having a check-in with us about that topic and what that might look like, and if we want to give further staff direction.
Kelly, would you thought there that be something part of open space and trails due to their ag leases? Or more in general through ComDev, or that's part of the discussion?
No, it crosses a lot of topic areas. So I think a work session, we could sort of hammer that out. Because, you know, for me, the interest was initially with water, right? And trying to get like some group to check in with on water issues. And then it became bigger with like the lease discussion and
pot cannabis.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got that on my list for work session time. John, we can work on that just for a discussion. Kelly, thanks for bringing that up. Kelly, did you have another issue you wanted to talk about as far as ponds? Not the fire, for use for fire mitigation ponds, but just ponds in general? Cindy Hubin mentioned it to me the other day. You're thinking, I can see you're thinking about it.
Yeah, we were going to talk about whether we included some code language related to aesthetic ponds.
Okay. Yeah, pescatorial.
Yeah. So would you like that? I'll talk to Cindy and see how she might want to bring that back.
Okay.
She's brought it up to me, and I thought I'd bring it back up to you. So is there any other future agenda items for the board? I'm not seeing any hands go up, so I think we're good. And John, now we're turning to open discussion.
Thanks, Patty. Give me just a sec to catch up with all of you. The major thing that I wanted to check in with you on is the Aspen International Mountain Foundation, who came in front of you for public comment during a regular meeting, has sent a request for funding, and that request should have gone out to the board at this point. I wanted to get some direction how the board wants to handle that request. The Mountain Foundation is asking Pickens County to contribute $25,000 or sponsor the event for $25,000, which they said in their letter is the amount that the city of Aspen has agreed to donate. I do have an email in to Aspen staff just to confirm that amount, but wanted to get some direction from the board, whether we needed to do any more with a work session, if the board had enough information at this point, or how you would like to handle this request.
What's the title of it again, John? What's the title?
It is the Aspen International Mountain Foundation, and they're requesting funding for an event that will take place September 24th through 28th in Aspen, I believe at the Institute. And I do not have the title on the email.
Okay, you know, that's for me, I remember when they came in and they did a thing at public comment, and they were way ahead, which was nice that they didn't come in at the last minute. But it was so long ago, I think I'd like more information, because $25,000 is a pretty significant amount of money.
Would you like to invite them back to a conversation, or do you want us just to bring the letter back for board conversation at this point?
How would the board like to proceed? Francie, and then Greg?
Well, I'd like to approve it. I think it's a really important conference. It includes mountain communities from all over the world. It's the first time it's been held in North America. And it covers topics that are of deep interest to the board. So I don't need to hear any more. I'd vote to approve it right here and now, but I'm happy to hear more. I'm just wondering if anybody knows what happened to Carino.
Happened to what?
I can give you an update, a brief one, if you'd like, Patty.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I agree with Francie. I think I heard enough previously, but certainly written communication about what the money will be used for and an update on what they're doing would certainly be appropriate before we write them a check. I do know that some other groups that are involved in mountain organizations are getting involved. I received there's a group called the Mountain Sentinels, which is a fully funded study program for college kids that are going to come in and participate in that from Fort Collins and other universities. Rick Stevens, our former town mayor of Basalt, received a fellowship to help participate in this thing. So I think momentum is building, and I certainly support what I've seen. It after starting out somewhat skeptically, wondering what they'd be doing. I'm beginning to get a real picture of it, and I think it's a good thing. Regarding Carino, who's the local chair and initiator of this whole thing with the UN, and has been doing it for many, many years, was involved in a terrible ski wreck about 5 days ago,
No.
and is in the hospital currently in Denver on one of our mountains, I think Aspen Mountain. That was in a collision, and she is in a hospital in Denver recovering in the ICU still. So wish her well. She, I think, had 7 broken ribs, clavicle, and what's the other bone on top of your shoulder? I think was broken. Really unfortunate incident. And so she's recovering, and she'll be out of touch, but there are other members of the group in the community who could present to us or write the letter or whatever while she's offline. I do know it's in September, so I don't think there's a rush to send money, and I wouldn't want to be in a rush, but I'm comfortable with it so far, and I'm looking to hear, a letter from them or something else to where they are would be enough for me, I think, rather than another presentation. But I'd like to hear another presentation also, either way.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Steve? Steve, you're muted. He tests me every day. I know he doesn't.
I pushed the button. I pushed it the wrong way. I think a letter would be appropriate at this time. I think it would be a terrific conference to have here in Aspen. And I'm thinking that the CAST group from Colorado Association of Ski Towns, Counties and Towns, could very likely be interested in attending it. I think that would be a good kind of an outreach to have some of them be able to come to the conference also.
Yeah, I would like to see what funds they've raised and from other organizations and what their budget stuff is. Not to say that I don't want to support it, I just would like more clarification of the use of county monies in this project. Kelly?
Yeah, I'm inclined to support it. This is a consortium of mountain governments, right, from around the world, of which we're sort of directly in that cohort. And I'm not sure I would support as much of a request for a conference anywhere, but given that our community is hosting this, I'm inclined to support it, but I'm happy to hear more as well.
So John, are you hearing direction from the board is that we're leaning in that direction. We just like clarification of their budgetary issues where they're requesting money and who's been in support.
Yeah, and I apologize. I just found the email, and Charlotte, I think I'd sent it to Patty and Francie as chair and vice chair initially. So I've just forwarded it on to the board. I think what I'm hearing is a lot of interest in supporting or sponsoring this event at some level, potentially the level that's been requested, and we should set aside a little bit of time at a future work session, maybe to have representatives to answer some questions from the board and to give you time to digest the letter. And so we'll try and do that pretty quickly. And I apologize. I thought all of you had the letter in your email.
And this would come out of the general fund, John?
This would come out of general fund,
Okay.
yes.
So we'd have to do an appropriation and et cetera. So we do need a little more time, but at least if they know the
Right.
money's coming, they will know the money's coming and how much we decide upon.
I think John Starr, who presented with Carino, has written one of these letters, and I think would be willing to come in. So we could reach out to him if you would, and let's get him back on the program. And sounds good.
Yeah, or he could just send
All
us
right.
the information and we can review it at a work session, open discussion.
Yep, and I just forwarded it on to you, and we'll set a time and we'll work on that, Patty.
Thank you. All right.
And that's all I have.
Any other members have open discussion items? Steve, please.
So I have 3 different items. One came up during CCI Public Lands the other day when Francie was our spokesperson at CCI, and we were voting on things the other day, and it brought up the question of whether we were going to pay public lands dues or not this year. We have not been paying them for several years, and both Francie and I thought we should bring it up to the board and have the discussion again. It was really Rachel when she was, had the tip with John Martin over, trying to become the chairman of the Public Lands Committee. And Rachel got aced out by a concerted effort by the conservative counties, eliminated her. And at that point, we dropped out of paying dues to the Public Lands Committee. But some of our close ally counties who align with our our beliefs on things participate in the Public Lands Committee and have members on the travel team that goes to NACO and goes to the Western Interstate Region meetings. So I thought we should perhaps take a look at it again. And I don't remember what the amount of the dues were. I think at the time we quit paying them, we decided to put the dues into maybe supporting CCAT, I think is where we put that money instead of into the CCI Public Lands.
Yeah, some more information as far as how much the dues is and how much time it takes for somebody to be committed. I don't want to join it and have people not being able to commit to it. And if there's travel time, it takes, Rachel put in a significant amount of time. She worked really hard on it, so we need to have somebody who's going to be committed to doing that. And I know that some of us are already spread a little thin, so we need to make that decision. Francie?
Well, we actually voted at the meeting on the people who were going to be on the traveling committee, and Hillary is one of them, and John Martin, of course, got reelected, and Gordon, I think his name is, from Archuleta County, or Walter, and then
I can't remember his name right now.
I can't remember the last one, but anyway, so I'd like to do it, and because I think Hillary would be a really good voice to have going to NACO meetings, and I think if she's, she would represent us, so I'd like to do it so that we can make sure they have the money to go and represent whatever. I know they won't all represent what we would like them to, but we know Hillary would.
I'm sorry, but I don't know who Hillary is.
Hillary is the commissioner from
Cooper.
San
Hillary
Miguel.
Cooper,
San Miguel?
San Miguel. Yeah, tell her. I was going to say tell you right. San Miguel.
So just for clarification, I think we have actually paid public lands at CCI. It was the NACO dues that were in question.
I think you're right, because when it came time to vote, they put up the counties that were in good standing, and we were listed in good standing. So I wondered about that.
So let's make sure we don't pay them twice.
So John, could you just check into that and report back to us? The dues, I think the public lands dues are due by some date later in February.
Yeah.
But I think they would accept them at any time if we were a little late or.
Yeah, so my understanding from Charlotte is we have paid the public lands due. We have not paid the NACO dues of $450 yet.
Okay. All right, Kelly had her hand up.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering what the aspiration is regarding CCI. You know, I mean, paying the public lands due lets us vote, but it doesn't let us do, you know, on who's on the traveling team and any public lands positions that Colorado is going to take, you know, the CCI Colorado chapter is going to take, but it doesn't do a whole lot more for us. So I guess I'm just wondering if Steve and Francie, if you guys have sort of greater interest in involvement there. I think either of you would be great reps for us and you know, in those conversations. Yeah, CCI just continues to be a tough one for me. You know, we continue to not really push forward a whole lot of meaningful legislation for Pitkin County, and the things that are meaningful for Pitkin County, I'm not sure our presence actually lends any additional influence because they're meaningful for a majority of counties. So at CCI, if we're winning, it's because everybody else is winning too. You know, or if we're getting gains, it's because everybody else is getting any gains. And I guess, you know, I'm not, yeah. So that continues to just sort of be my concern overall at CCI. So I'm wondering what you guys hope to like get out of with the public land stuff. And I will say too, Keith Baker was voted as chair. He's the Chaffee County Commissioner.
Yeah.
He's great. He really threads a needle, I think, for between all the counties and carries a progressive voice forward as well. So I'm glad that he won that seat.
That's good to hear, actually, really good to hear.
Yeah, and I mean, I personally don't have any interest in traveling to Washington and around like Rachel used to for NACO. I think my dad used to do that when he was a county commissioner. He was very active in CCI, and I think he was on the public lands travel team back in his day. But I personally I am maxed out on, you know, the different responsibilities I have and don't want to take on anything else big like that. But Francie might very well want to. And I think, you know, Francie lives across the road basically from Dorothea Ferris, and Dorothea was very active in CCI. She might have been on the, you know, done a lot of stuff at NACO. She was the CCI president one year. So it would be kind of the heritage for the Prince Creek Road for, you know, being really interested in public lands is very important to that part of the county, maybe more so than other parts of the county. So,
well, you know, we won't be electing travelers again for a year, right, Steve? So it gives you some time to think about that, and I'll have a chat with Dorothea. I'm certainly very interested in public lands, and you know, we'll see where that goes.
And as far as NACO, I had looked into starting to attend the NACO meetings, but you have to really have a history with them before you're really making a difference there. Most of the time you're just sitting back in the back of the room watching everybody else run meetings and be involved. So That's why, I mean, it took years for Rachel to get into the position she got into, just as it did with me with the National Association of Regional Counties, Councils of Government. You had to really be vested in that effort for quite a while to be able to take a seat at the table to make a difference. But so that's for a broader discussion. If we have somebody who wants to commit to that, we'll have to see what happens.
I do agree with Kelly that our voice is small in CCI. So I don't know how strong it would be by the time we got to Washington.
Yeah, it would be even smaller. Then I do have two other things, Patty.
Okay, go ahead, Steve.
They both have to do with letters from members of the public. One was a letter from Tricia McIntyre, who is a property manager or a realtor. She wrote a letter kind of asking if we would be interested in having a meeting about the short-term rental issue with some of the property managers in the town. And I thought we should talk about it, maybe not today, but I want to make sure everybody does read that letter and we can think about, maybe having I don't know when we would do that, how that ties in with our process on the second reading and modifying the short-term, or possibly modifying the short-term rental resolution. But what's everybody's thoughts on meeting with a group of property managers, or do we want to have, it's a question, do we want to have these, open it up to more meetings with members of the public and whatnot? If we meet with property managers, are we going to then have to make it a broader discussion open to members of the public? I don't know, it might be a can of worms we'd be opening if we did that.
Yeah, I have not thoroughly read her letter, but yeah, that would be my concern, is then we'll be with the Board of Realtors, and then it'll be with, who knows. I would rather, we will have at our next reading, our second reading, continued public hearing, we will again have the opportunity for the public to be heard. And so the board knows I did meet with John Ely and Cindy Hubin yesterday, and they are drafting and so am I, working on a list of the points that needed further investigation for clarification for staff direction. I think Cindy and John and I got things back on track, I'm hoping. And that does not in any way say that at the next reading we're going to vote to pass the ordinance. Chances are, I'm going to give everybody a heads up, it'll be to gather more information, give direction to staff, and have some decision points so we can move forward, hopefully with a final draft of an ordinance in some way, shape, or form for a follow-up reading to be scheduled shortly thereafter. Francie?
I have a general question about meeting with people from industries that affect our decisions. And I do feel sometimes that we're kind of isolated as commissioners, and we don't, I know, Steve, you go to the oil and gas thing every year, and I think that's a really good idea. I got called yesterday by a woman who represents Airbnb, and I also have had a letter from our local Airbnb rep. And they expressed an interest in helping us implement controls over the STR scene and also give us information. And, of course, I was really dubious at first, like obviously they're going to be pushing for as many STRs as possible, but that isn't actually the way the conversation went. And so I'm wondering about what do we do about trying to get input from industry and just in general and in this case particularly.
Industry is welcome to submit public comment just as everyone else, is my understanding. And again, if we start meeting with different sectors, we're going to have to meet with all of them with special meetings to make sure there's a fair playing field. And I myself am not interested in doing that. I know that we all take time and consideration into public comment that we received. And once we get this up and running, we will have a staff person who's involved with enforcement and a staff person who's involved with running this STR program through community development. So I think at that point, if we have questions and queries, to reach out to somebody who has, been involved, say somebody in Summit County who's running their program, that would be appropriate contacts. I just find it uncomfortable for me to be meeting with a special sector of this who I really appreciate their taking time to send us their information, their concerns, their comments, and their suggestions, just like the regular members of the public. But the board may have a different opinion on that. I'm stating my opinion, and it's up to the board. Greg?
Yeah, thanks, Patty. I remember when we first started talking about STRs, I suggested to staff that they actually reach out to Airbnb and VRBO and whoever else they are, because this is happening across the country, and these organizations who started the STR, the ability for easy short-term rentals. Short-term rentals, as we find out, have been going on for decades, but they've made it so easy that anybody can do it, right? They actually have a lot of insight. They have an interest in keeping the markets open, but they also, I think, are certainly aware of the issues in the communities across the country similar to ours. So I think there's a lot of insight there, and that's why I asked that our own staff reach out and learn as much as possible, and not always think of them as an adversary, but perhaps there is an opportunity for some positive information and solutions there. But I think to me, I was thinking it would be a staff issue. If they've reached out to you, Francie, I think that's great, and that you're sharing it's great. Somehow that information has to get processed and go through staff and presented to us, hopefully in the most objective way. Yeah, that's kind of what I was expecting. And I would be intrigued and interested in hearing what their take on this is, because if I've learned anything in the last few weeks, is that this is more complicated than I thought. And I think we can get it right, but I think it might require listening to more voices. If they just have to come through public comment, that's fine too. They can come and present their 3 minutes worth, I guess, in a couple different packages. But I think it would be worth learning their perspective.
Well, John, could you check with Cindy Hubin to see if they have not? It would be my understanding that we've reached out to just about everybody that we can think of in trying to create this ordinance. But John, could you check in with Cindy to see if staff has done that with the entities such as Airbnb? Yeah.
Yeah, we can do that, Patty. I think staff was operating a little bit under direction from the board that was given in multiple work sessions. And so this is a good conversation, and one I suspect we'll probably delve into a little bit in the next couple days too.
Okay, thank you, John.
About process.
Kelly and then Francie.
Yeah, a couple thoughts here. Francie, I'd love if you could impart an invitation or an introduction between me and whoever reached out to you. As you guys know, I'm having state level conversations about this whole short-term rental landscape, and they are being a bit adversarial regarding even basic requests for information and an unwillingness to share information related to, where these units are being rented, the number of days, things like that. So, we're really running into some walls with the big platforms, just to kind of provide my insight to whether there is, I'm always hopeful for opportunities for collaboration. We're kind of running into some roadblocks already. So, I think for me, the bigger question here is the question was posed to our board early on in these work session conversations related to the quality of public conversation And, you know, we've gotten to this point because I feel like that direction at the time was the ability to look to other jurisdictions in Colorado and elsewhere at what had been done, and for us to evaluate our local considerations against those. And it, you know, I'm starting to wonder if this group or a majority of this group is now requesting that we go back to a full-on public input process. I continue to think we don't need that. I feel like the opposition we've heard was pretty, for me, very well anticipated and expected and considered in how I thought about our approach to this topic. But that is a departure from the direction, if that is the direction that the majority of this board wishes to take, that is a departure from what was given 9 months ago. And so I just want to point that out on this topic. And I've heard a lot of, you know, everyone reserves the right to change their mind. You know, it does bring up for me a little bit of a violation of our working agreement, which I'm sure we'll dig into more in our retreat conversations, but that's my reaction to what I'm hearing with these specific questions and the context that I think I'm hearing more broadly.
Thank you, Kelly. Francie?
Well, this woman whose name is Christy Faraci, she just wants to participate as a stakeholder, and so she kind of missed the window so far. She's not trying to lobby us to do one thing or another, or so it sounded when I spoke with her. I'm happy to send her contact to you. She did ask if she should be talking to the county manager, so I'm glad it got brought up because it was on my list to bring up. I am with you on that, Kelly. I do not want to start all over again with public input. I think we've had a lot of public input from both sides now, and we're still getting it. And I do think that other jurisdictions are where we need to go. Like I would really like to get together with the Glenwood people, with Jonathan, for instance, and see how they're doing with the implementation of their policies. And, you know, I think those kinds of conversations probably at this point are more helpful than opening it up to the public. So I agree with you on that, Kelly.
Well, and, you know, the public hearing was continued, so we can expect more comment. I'm surprised, I don't know why we would have her reach out to the county manager, so to speak, but I think that anybody's welcome, again, to submit public comment, and I know that staff has reached out, as Kelly said, to jurisdictions regionally, across the state and beyond, to see what they're doing, to see how their programs have worked and how their programs have not worked, and that's been brought into the picture in the discussions with both John Ely and Cindy Hubin. So I think when I get a chance to get that, just the bullet points that John and Cindy and I discussed, we went by the notes that Cindy and I had taken very carefully at our last hearing, and the points that the board had reached out on to try and address them as to what further information was needed and how the language might be redrafted to get us moving this thing forward so that we can have it in place, get staff working on it, and start the program sooner than later. Because I think that was the intention of the board when we started this last spring. So, that being said, thank you for bringing that to our attention. I think, you know, there's a lot of people interested in this, and but you know what, I think that we had a kind of a direction to staff in the beginning, and I'm trying to get us back on track with that. Okay, any other open discussion?
Okay, I had one more letter, and I'll be really brief on this. I don't think we want a long discussion on it now because we do need to go into executive session also. It's a letter from Emily Farrell, who was the counselor at the high school, Aspen High School, requesting that we reconsider the masking rule for school children because of the adverse effects on the children's language learning acquisition and different things, their socialization. Her letter, I mean, she she is, you know, an educator, and her letter really made me start thinking about, you know, maybe it is time for schools to not require masks for their kids. And it made me also think, well, are all the staff, the adult people at the school, are they all vaccinated, or are some of them not vaccinated? And it seems to me that would be an essential step. If the children weren't wearing masks at school, then all the adults who they come into contact with at school should be fully vaccinated and perhaps wearing masks when they're not directly teaching kids or something. So it made me start thinking about it. I don't think we want to have a lengthy discussion right now, but I wanted to point out we did receive her letter first thing this morning and made me start thinking about the issues.
Well,
Thank you.
Greg, do you want to explain to Steve that there's been a special meeting called of the Board of Health to discuss masks?
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Steve and Patty. Yes, we're going to call it and announce. It's already posted on the website, but there'll be a special meeting on February 10th, Thursday, February 10th, 1 to 3, which will include this discussion of masking, looking at the data that's coming in, looking at the way that a lot of the country is moving. We'll be getting the most recent information data from public health, and the board will be considering it then. So
and then
that's February.
Right, and then that decision would also be something that had to be made along with the school district.
Right. Well, the Board of Health, as John Ely pointed out, or maybe Peacock last week, is required to be, call a meeting to change the order. So if the order does change, we'll be able to do it then.
Yeah, but I mean, but the school district will be involved in that discussion if we're talking about no masks in the classrooms.
Right.
Okay. And
Hopefully
other
that
places
helps.
on the campus. Okay, great. Steve, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and thanks. It's good. I think the Board of Health is the appropriate place to have that discussion. I would love to see the Board of Health take verbal public comments at the Board of Health meetings on issues.
I think that's the plan for this meeting. They're still working out those details, is my understanding, that they have been listening to the public and know that this is an issue where the public would like to be heard. So I think that.
Yeah, definitely. We're getting a lot of letters about that.
This is a special meeting called by the Board of Health to address this one issue, is my understanding. Francie?
Okay, thanks.
I was over in Vail this weekend with my daughter, and her husband is the head of the Peak School in Frisco. And Summit, as you know, removed the mask mandate for their county and for their schools, except for 2 through 11-year-olds. And so he has a mask mandate at his school, but he's very concerned. He doesn't see how he's going to be able to continue it with the pressure he's getting from most of his board and his community. And these people who have to make these decisions for the schools are in really untenable positions. There's no way he can win this. He's going to lose no matter what he does. And it's really tough, but it's really sad to think that everybody else can go to the Super Bowl unmasked and all these other events, and then the kids ages 2 to 11 have to wear masks all the time. It's heartbreaking to me.
Kelly?
Yeah, I guess I'll just give a little bit of my input now on this. So, Greg, as you think about this, where I've stood, and I don't really continue to change that perspective a whole lot, with the exception that, I think even as the numbers may not indicate now that there's a time, I think some off ramp, that the community can look to would probably be a really great way to frame the conversation or an outcome from the meeting, to provide just what this path to getting back to normal looks like. And I also just continue to think, I hope masking is just a regular part of our lives moving forward for the benefits they do provide during endemic disease as well. Thanks.
Yeah, and the other thing too, I think we need to make sure everybody still keeps in mind that there could be another wave, and we could, we all want to move forward, but we don't know what this virus is going to do the next turnaround. So, I just want people to understand that, we're looking good, we're moving in the right direction now, but we thought that a while ago, and it turned out not to be. So let's just keep our hopes up and our prayers going and see where we get. But, there's always the possibility that we may have to take a little step back to take big steps forward. So, Steve, thanks for bringing that up. And Greg, I'm hoping to join you at that meeting. So, all right.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing it up. I'm glad to hear the opinions of my board. I really do appreciate what everyone is saying. I wanted to call your attention to the op-ed or the commentary I have in the Daily News today, and then also to letters by Rob Stein, who is the outgoing superintendent of the Roaring Fork Schools, on how he saw that whole issue has gone down, and really what it comes out to being about is commissioners deciding to usurp the public health director or public health authority in favor of a political consideration. And I think we've done our best to navigate what is a really difficult scenario. We know people don't like masks and don't want to have to do this anymore, but we also know that we want to trust the data and the evidence that supports going in the right direction. And yes, I really do want to see an off-ramp, and I'm sure we're going to hear about that when we open up public comment. But we're also going to hear, I think, from people who will support what we've done to keep the community safe. So I can only say I'm grateful for a public health department that has been strong, and a board of health that's been pretty strong about this as well. And I think we're going to do it when it's the right time. And I'm hoping that's really soon. We're all watching that the COVID, Omicron surge declining, and everybody's anticipating when it's going to be okay, using actual medical data to open things up. And so stay tuned. It's in the works. There's been a lot of discussion about it, and there'll be more to come.
Okay.
Thanks for that.
That being said, I want to remind the board tomorrow, John, it starts at 8 o'clock, I believe, our board retreat. Kelly, yeah, because I'm trying to get us into exec, but go ahead, Kelly.
Sorry, no, I just wanted to let you know that because of the timing for my kids' drop off, I'm probably going to be 10 to 15 minutes late, so I'll be there at 8:45. The agenda has breakfast 8 to 8:30, and then us starting at 8:30. And I do apologize for that. I'll get there as quickly as I can.
We'll do a slow rolling start for you, Kelly, and we promise we won't eat all the breakfast before you get there.
Okay.
We'll
and I'll make up for it with cinnamon rolls on Thursday.
Okay. We got you. Holding you to it.
We do have a fairly flexible agenda if the board wants to push back for a few minutes. It may be good for everyone to be there.
Yeah, we'll keep that in mind. Thanks for letting me know. But anyway, tomorrow 8 to 8:30, and it is the third floor, John, which is actually the same floor as the library entrance, right? That's the third floor of the new city hall. That's where the staircase starts going down. So I'm assuming that's the top floor. So everybody knows. And it's right when you walk in the door. Yeah, it's straight back when you walk in the door.
And mind the traffic and the commute getting into town that time of day, since we don't do it that.
Yeah. So we're going to have a long, glorious day ahead of us tomorrow and Thursday. So now I want to open up a special meeting for the purposes of executive session, employee housing acquisition pursuant to Colorado Revised Statute 24-6-4024A, FAA negotiations regarding the community vision statement pursuant to CRS 24-6-4024B and E, and the COGGC, which is the Colorado, what is it, is that the oil and gas? Yeah.
Conservation
Financial Assurance Rulemaking pursuant to CRS 24-6-4024B. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I have a motion by Greg.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I will join you. There's a link that John Ely sent, so I'll see you guys in a few minutes. I need to run upstairs.
How many minutes?
3 o'clock still?
Yeah, let's do 3 o'clock.
Good.
See you soon.
Thank you.